Just picked one example from the book because I want to make sure you guys understand how to compute long-term value, right? And so just to recap again, you're not a traditional business model that you learn to build. You're starting with revenue, you're taking into account all costs, and you're coming up with a profit, and you're doing this over for all customers over the next many years, right? This is different. You're only trying to understand what is the long-term value of a single customer and what is the cost of acquiring that single customer. And you don't care about administrative costs, right? So your long-term value is the net present value, right? Everyone knows that concept? Yeah. All right. So long-term value is the net present value of the gross profit from selling your product, right? And so we're taking the example of widgets, where someone sells widgets, and that's the company. And here the price of a widget is $10,000 US. The gross margin is 65%, and so you profit from the widget at $6,500 US. The price of a yearly maintenance contract is $750 the first year, and thereafter $1,500, right? And your retention rate. Now, I just want to take a second here. One of the key factors with respect to your customer's long-term value is your retention rate. And what a lot of startups do and focus on is trying to grow their user base very early and don't focus on keeping these users extremely happy, right? And what happens is if your retention rate dips, that has a pretty meaningful impact on the long-term value of a customer. So what happens is you've got this cost of customer acquisition where you're focusing on getting a lot of customers, but the customers coming in, if you were to shift that focus from getting new customers slightly, so I'm not saying not to focus on getting new customers, do that and do that well, but make sure you measure, track, and figure out ways to keep retention rate high.
And there's a compounding effect to that.
Correct,
just like
right.
Investments. So the difference between 5% cancellation and say 7% cancellation
Is a big deal.
I think is that big. It is a huge
But over
deal.
5 years, that's a big deal, right? Because you're compounding that 2% every year,
Huge deal
right?
in the valuation of the company.
And so I just want to highlight that. So here you see the first year retention rate is 100%. Thereafter it's 90%, which is very high. All right? And so what you're doing there then is you're taking, as Don pointed out, your cumulative retention rate. So although it's 90%, you see in year 4, that comes down to a retention of 65, right? Make sense, everyone?
Yep. So that means that you said cumulative, right? So
Yeah.
all the customers have acquired over 4 years, some of which have 4-year tenure, some of which have could have a tenure of a few months. 65.6% of them are with you by the end of year 4.
Correct. Right, and that's with a 90% yearly retention rate. And so 10% every year fall off, which gives you by year 4, 35% falling off. And so one of the things to do when you build your model is to check the sensitivity of your long-term value to small changes in retention rate, right? So you can easily plot a table which shows that if my retention rate were 90%, what is my long-term value? And how much does that change if that drops to 80%?
And we had a model that we used with one of our big lenders with the bank, and they wanted to constantly see it updated with our current metrics to look at long-term value and how were they going to invest its money, loan money, and at what
Yeah.
rate. So this was very common.
So the next part is, all right, so you're still spending on this yearly maintenance contract which you provide, and so your gross margin from that maintenance contract is 85%, and so your profit from maintenance is this 85% times your cumulative retention rate times the price of the maintenance contract. Does that make sense?
Why would we need to kind of separate that? Because
Separate what?
thinking about retention split out from all of this.
Yeah.
Like, can you give an example? I know this is
Yeah.
widgets, it's very broad, but like,
Yeah, no, so I can talk through this a little bit, Cyrus. So here, so all you're trying to do is you're trying to come up with your gross profit, and that's all you're trying to do in each year, right? And so in year 0, you sold the widget, and so you had a gross profit, and so you have the 6,500.
Okay.
Thereafter, you're just trying to figure out what percent customer is left, right? Because that customer is no longer with you, right? There's a smaller percent of that customer with you because you're doing this only for one customer. And so the cumulative retention rate is to measure that times your gross profit, right? So, and your gross profit here is 85% times 750. The only thing you're adding to that is you're multiplying by the number of customers left.
Right, but my question's around the activity for retention here. So, are you saying that in addition to the sales I'm getting, every customer is going to be benefiting from some sort of retention incentive? Like, can you
Yeah,
give us
so
an
I
example?
can talk through what are the things with respect to that could drive retention rate, right? The number one most important thing with a business to business is your level of customer service, right? And so if you get your customer service wrong, regardless of how many new people are coming to your platform through great marketing, they're not going to survive for year 2 and year 3 and year 4, right? And so what's critical is to get aspects of customer experience. So I said customer service, but really what keeps customers with you, right, is a fantastic customer experience. And so if you can get that portion right, and which is why this is very meaningful for a young startup to track, right? Because it really tells you in sort of your first few months when you start what customers like and what they don't, why are customers dropping out, right? So you actually learn a hell of a lot from just figuring out why a customer left you. And it's fine, it's going to happen because you're starting a business. You're not going to start it perfectly and everyone's not going to stay with you. But if you track the metric, if you survey customers that leave, you could interview them, whatever it be. But if you get real data about why they did not stay, and if you fix that for the next round of customers, if you think, so there's one of two things. You get a customer, they don't stay. It could be that they were not your real target customer, right? So if you got a wrong type of customer and they didn't like your service because your service was not tailored to them, that's fine. You say, all right, we now know that we need to identify our customers that we take in better, right? So you learn from there that your leads need to be of a higher quality, your customers need to match your customer profile and persona better. If, however, you learn that this person really was the perfect fit for your service, but they didn't like something about it, and they give you valuable information that you can then go and act on and fix that, that's what you do to drive this higher, right? All right, so here you have, so now you have your gross margin from maintenance and your gross margin from selling the widget, and you're just taking the sum of these two for sum of profits. And then you're calculating the net present value of that sum of profits. The cost of capital assumed is 50%. Generally, for a young startup, that varies from 30 to 70. For a social impact venture, it is potentially possible to raise money at a lower cost of capital, right? Because people care about not just the fact that you're looking to make money, but you're also trying to solve a meaningful problem and have positive impact. And so that for some of you guys could potentially be closer to the 30 range rather than the 50 to 70 range. And which obviously has a huge impact on your net present value, right? So the two key things to check sensitivity here on would be retention rate and your cost of capital. And if you can raise cost of capital at a rate of 25 to 30%, that's quite meaningful. Or if you get grant capital, then that's fantastic, obviously. All right. All right, so key factors. I think we covered most of these. All right, so here, business model chosen is critical, right? So what we did is we showed the LTV for a particular business model where you're selling this widget and then you have a maintenance contract, right? But if you approach the business model differently, then you might have a very different LTV, right? And all right, your LTV is about gross profit, not revenue. To highlight that again, right? So here you're once again measuring gross profit. It's not revenue, and it's not total profit. Yeah. Here, overhead costs are excluded and are not negligible, right? So what this model does, it provides you an early framework to understand if your startup is viable or not from a long-term standpoint. Can you get to that ratio of 3? This is not meant to replace separately figuring out what your administrative costs are. So you need a full business model with your number of customer projections for each year, along with the salaries you guys will want to pay yourselves at some point in time, right? You're not going to do this for free indefinitely. And so this is not meant to take that into account. All this is saying is that if you have a ratio of long-term value to COCA of 3, that factor of 2 is more than sufficient buffer to take care of administrative costs, right? And so what they're saying is that if you get to that 3, and if it's a real scalable model, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be a successful, sustainable business. But in your earlier days, it's quite critical, especially if you're not hitting profitability yet and you guys need to get paid salaries, then this is important to take into account, right? All right, so next, gross margins have a large impact. All right, so we spoke about the importance of retention rate. We spoke about the importance of the costs that you raise capital at. What is critical is your gross margins, right? And so here we saw that your gross margins were 65% for the sale and then 85% for your maintenance contract. The higher you can push that up, that has a very meaningful impact on your long-term value, right? And so Lark Technologies, they started with a silent alarm clock, right? So they created a product which people used, a silent alarm clock. So you don't wake up your partner or whatever, multiple ways to use that. But then what they did, so they weren't making money on this silent alarm clock. But then what they did is they started providing a subscription service that provided an expert sleep report, which sounds crazy, but it really worked for them, right? And so now they had a revenue model, and they've used the concept of essentially upselling to use this user base from which they were selling to, but they were not really making any money from, and they found a way to make money from it, right? All right, so with respect to gross margins, think about what you can upsell to this person that feels this pain point, right? Next, all right, we spoke at length about retention rates, and finally, all right, we spoke about consider additional upselling opportunities. All right, next, cost of